Thank you very much for having me over. I've been to this conference before and really enjoyed it. A lot of good people here and good ideas, so I was looking forward to the opportunity to be here this week. I don't know about any of you, but I do know this kind of hat when I walked in this morning. If you've ever been asked to talk in church, I get asked every once in a while. I usually tell the preacher I can talk to a group of farmers, but I don't talk in front of church. So apparently, I was thinking about that. You know, it's kind of like the rest of this program. Sometimes it's better to work with nature than against. Maybe I should be working with God a little bit more because he's showing me he's in charge. So he got me from in front of the church one way or another. So, but anyway, it's great to be here today. I want to start out just a little bit tell you about our operation. I think the reason that's important is the way we do things, the way we approach farming and conservation and things is important to our success, I think. So I'll just give you a little bit of background. So we are a fourth generation family farm in north central Indiana. So if you're familiar with Indiana, we're west of here, just a little bit south, right north side of Indianapolis, between Indianapolis and Tipton. So we've got a little bit of encroachment coming up from the south. We're about 30 miles north of downtown Indianapolis. So, that area becomes important in the way that we do things. We've been no-tilling since 1989, continuously, corn and soybeans. Played around a little bit with some soybeans before that. We're primarily a corn-soybean rotation. We always have a few fields that need to be switched up or moved around, and we have some continuous corn plots and things like that. But corn-soybean rotation, 12 years of cover crops at this point, at least. That's when we started doing enough that it economically mattered to us. You know, we played around with some tests and things before that. We have got liquid hog manure. I heard the question in one of the sessions earlier about whether or not you can incorporate manures into a no-till system, and you certainly can, and I'll show some pictures of how we're doing that. We do 1 acre grid management. I'll talk a little bit about that and the importance of your fertility and input management in this system. But really the key there that I want to touch on is for us, we believe, and you'll see in the numbers here as I go through them, that conservation is the best economic model on our farm. The inputs and the soil and everything has value on our farm, whether it be short-term or long-term, but it all comes back to having value, and we need to capture that value. And again, as I said, being on the north side of Indianapolis, all the water that leaves our farm goes into one of two reservoirs and ends up being part of the drinking water supply for Indianapolis. So we feel, when my kids go to school with the other kids that live around the lake and things like that, they get asked questions about why the lake's silting in, and they've got the color that it has when it rains and things like that. So we feel we have an obligation in the community to do everything that we can to make sure that we have clean water leaving our farm. We also feel that economically it's important to us that if we pay for things, we need to keep them on the farm. So if you heard Jim's talk earlier before lunch, he was talking a little bit about carbon. I thought that was just a tremendous example. It takes 500 pounds of carbon per day to grow a 200 bushel corn crop. That was way more than I would have guessed. So, but the bottom line is, for a lot of people in our area, and maybe for us in years past, but the idea of tillage as being the conventional practice it's just not sustainable. We can't keep doing that. We're burning off the carbon, and what we need to be doing is something that captures carbon, right? Puts that into the soil and builds this system, and that's how we're gonna continue our farm on for generations to come, by getting the soil built back up instead of continuing to degrade it. So basically, I want to start out this healthy soil process, I guess. I really want to start out by identifying some of the things that we think healthy soil gives us, and there's economic value to some of these. Some of these are a little less tangible, but let's just start out by identifying some of the things that healthy soil returns to us. So number one, we think that a good functioning healthy soil gives us increased yield, right? So that's an economic benefit right off the top. I think we've got the data at this point to support that. We'll look at it later. We have increased biology. We've been talking all day in this room about cycling of the residues and things like that. The biology is really important to keeping this system functioning the way it needs to without tillage in it. Nutrient efficiency and cycling. We see great examples of that, especially in the manured areas and things like that, of holding on to those nutrients. Drought tolerance. I've got data in here to talk about how we're improving our drought tolerance, whether it be a long full season drought or a short term dry spell in the season, and how we're able to better survive that. Improved water infiltration, water holding, get that water in the ground where it falls, not all running off the hills and having the hills die in the middle of the summer. We've got improved plant health, and that comes from the diversity. We see much less insect problem and disease problems than what we used to have, and I think I attribute that to the diversity of the system. And the improved structure and trafficability, I can't give that enough credit. We get out there without making a mess on days that other guys are leaving some pretty good tracks and things. Once you've got that structure and those pores for the water to go down in, and the soil still has structure to hold you up and things like that, so we gain more working days. And we improve our economics and agronomics, which we'll look at. So this is kind of a process. Like I said, we started out with no-till back in '89. And that was kind of the first step in the process for us. And I'm not sure that would be necessarily the first thing we should have done, but that was where we were at and where our understanding comes from. So the first step in this soil quality journey for us was to go to no-till. And that means continuous no-till, not rotational tillage where we're doing, tilling one crop or the other and not the alternating crop. Continuous no-till so you can start to build that soil structure, avoid those tillage events altogether. That's the first very important step in the process. For us, and if you can see it there, it's a little hard to see the black lines, but this is a great example. For us in our soils, we found that nothing really matters if you don't have proper drainage or proper water management, whether that's surface drainage, subsurface drainage, but we have excesses of water. Some people deal with shortages of water. We have excesses of water in the spring, and we find that nothing really matters if we don't take care of the water in the soil. Now, you can do that a lot of different ways. You can, depending on your soil types and things, you can grow it out with cover crops, you can drain it with tile, you can run it off the top, whatever that is, but water management is critical. I just think this is a great example here. We've got 3 different landlords in this picture. One that we own, one where the landlord allowed us or worked out a deal with us to put in tile, and the other one where they said, we don't want to commit, how long we're going to let you run it or anything, don't want to put any money into tile. So you can see the difference there. So we're looking at, tremendously 250 bushel yields there, 250 bushel yields there, average of about 90 bushel there. And that's the difference in drainage. So it doesn't matter how well my fertility was managed, it doesn't matter what the cover crop was, it doesn't matter anything else for us on these soil types. If the drainage or that air water soil balance is not achieved somehow, then we're not going to be able to grow a good crop. So I just think that's kind of foundational in looking at this process. This is just a great picture where we're installing tile on one of the farms, and shows this is Thanksgiving time frame. So that's a nice fall growth there for kind of our after bean ahead of corn, no-till corn mix with oats, radish, rape, and clover in it. Really pleased with that as a mix. This is an example of that field, and again, you're looking for that structure that you're building with no-till and cover crops. You can see there, again, this is pre-Thanksgiving, and you're looking at roots easily down 3 feet there, really doing well. So, at the same time, I talked about this system. We also do 1 acre grid fertility management. And that's really important. Anybody that hasn't gone to the extent of doing some intensive grid sampling, I'm not talking about 2.5 acre grids, I'm talking about 1 acre or less. A lot of people are recommending less now. But what that allows you to do on input management with confidence, right? So when you get to sub 1 acre grids, we're looking at an 80% confidence, really is of the recommendation that we're making based on that test. We get to about an 80% level. 2.5 acre grids are at about 50% level. Larger than 2.5, you're somewhere less than that. So, you know, we've taken this management, we're replacing tillage with management. This is kind of the theme I think you'll see all the way through here. And so we're taking this, this management intensively, and we're using, you know, in this case with, you know, we can adjust pH and using gypsum, things like that. But we can go right down to adjusting our seeding rates and our nitrogen recommendations and things based on CEC, based on organic matter, more than having to depend on the kind of vague soil type maps that we've got sometimes. We can get very precise with our recommendations. And again, I just think that's all important in the way you treat all of this to get the results that you want to get. The low disturbance equipment is critical, obviously. You can see there we've got our side dress bar. The Deere 2510 single disc does a great job in a no-till system. Real thing I want to show here on this one is that manure applicator. So that's a dragline bar with the Dietrich sweeps on it. We built that with some equip money about 15 years ago, I would say, and it's been a tremendous investment. You see the bottom right corner picture there for you guys is an area where we applied hog manure at 8,000 gallons per acre about 10 minutes before that picture. So you let that settle down. If it's done in the fall, you don't have to do anything to it. You can come right back in and no-till into it. If it's done in the spring, you may or may not have to hit it with a harrow or something, just like a Phillips harrow, just to level it out a little bit. But it is possible with the drag line with very little compaction and with those shanks to do hog manure applications with very little soil disturbance. So we kind of got this all figured out and figured out how to get our manure put on, how we wanted to manage the nutrients and the inputs, got the drainage, kind of understood the importance of it, continue to work on getting more farms drained, and got our no-till system kind of tweaked, got our planter figured out, so all of those things that go into this no-till soil health system up into the early 2000s, we were working on perfecting all of that. And then we reached a point where we said, okay, how do we keep moving forward? How do we make this happen faster? How do we make bigger improvements, things like that? That's when we started looking into cover crops and looking at how we can utilize getting more crops into the rotation and building more biomass, putting carbon into the soil is basically the goal. So, and how we wanted to be able to bring out new farms faster than what we've been able to in the past. So that's kind of where we got to looking at cover crops. And we kind of, same as I had the list earlier of what soil health does for us, this is kind of a list of, what's our goal for cover crops? Because if you're going to go out there and you're going to spend this money on cover crops, you're going to put a lot of time into getting them planted, a lot of money into seed, you're going to have to worry about terminating them. You've got to have some goals and things that you think cover crops can accomplish on your farm. One of the early ones for us was just looking at something like radishes or annual ryegrass to help remove compaction. We knew we had areas that we had compacted. You always have those, and some of them were old areas that we've just never been able to get rid of, even with inline rippers and things like that. We were getting really tired of trying to utilize steel to get rid of compaction because all it was doing was moving it deeper and breaking up the structure we had. So using the living roots as a soil repair tool to eliminate compaction has been a great benefit to us. To help us in those transition fields as we pick up new farms. When you farm this way, people tend to seek you out, especially the younger generations now that are inheriting farms and things like that. And, I'll call them Facebook landlords and things, but That's endearing, I suppose. But people that are aware of the environment, aware of water quality and things, and want you to treat their farm a certain way, we get a lot of people that seek us out and ask us to treat their farm this way. So as we get those new farms that may or may not have been treated well, have some repair to do, cover crops do it great, are really important for us in transitioning those farms into the no-till system for us. Rotational advantage, certainly. When we were stuck in a corn bean rotation, wheat is okay in our area, but it's not great. And so when we do have had wheat, it's not a very big percentage of the acres. So looking on a broader scale, we're farming close to 7,000 acres now. So we don't want to have that. We don't want to have 2,000 acres of wheat. It's just not in our plan. So to look at broadening our rotations and getting something in there to add some diversity. Of course, we wanted to take things to the next level, like I've talked about. We want to trap nitrogen from the manure crop, as well as leftover from the corn crop or the soybean crop. We've seen tremendous evidence, both in the following crop as well as in some tests and tissue tests and things we've done, that we're able to capture those nutrients that are left over and keep those in play for the next crop rather than letting them get away. Erosion control, I've got an example of that coming up next. We're not in an area where erosion is a huge problem. I'll certainly have examples of cases where we do have some erosion just even within the field that we're able to counteract. Excuse me. Of course, in the continuous corn, we always put a cover crop in between the corn after corn to help break up that cycle, trick the bugs a little bit. We want to cycle nutrients. We want to keep them from either getting away off the top with the water or getting away out the bottom. We want to have a living root intersecting any nutrient we can, holding on to that for the next crop instead of letting it get away from us. Building organic matter, just more benefits than you can list to organic matter, right? Getting the carbon in the soil as a source of energy, holding water, holding nutrients. 1% of organic matter is tremendously valuable. We want, of course, the economics, again, we'll talk about. And the bottom line there, Grandpa used cover crops, right? He was pretty smart, and he used cover crops. He used green manures. He understood the value of rotation, and maybe over the last 40, 50 years, we've gotten a little lazy, and it was pretty easy to grow corn soybeans. So, thinking back to things maybe that we need to revisit a little bit. So, this is just an example. I was talking about erosion. You can see here, this is not a highly erodible field. It actually has very little slope. This is one of the fields where we have a test plot with Purdue, and coming across that field, on the right-hand side, the top picture on the right-hand side is a cereal rye test strip. On the left-hand side is a no-cover test strip. Both sides, this whole field has been no-tilled for almost 20 years. And what you can see there is that where there was no topographic feature making that water go one way or another, it was just kind of that sheet erosion going on. This was in the January time frame when we had one of those thaw events and rain. You can see that the water came over to that cover crop and just stopped and moved on this way. The cover crop did a great job of keeping the water from moving on in that direction. The thing that was really interesting to me in the bottom picture, same time frame, when you get to an area in the field where the topography forces the water to channel a little bit and go across that cover crop, within 60 feet there, you've got all of the sediment and things that were carried in that water deposited out into that relatively small cover crop. This is not a big 3-foot tall, lush cover crop. This is a wintertime, fairly late planted cereal rye cover crop. And it was able to capture all that within 60 feet. We've gone from that murky, nutrient-filled water to nice, clean water flowing across that cover crop. That's important if it's leaving the field, but it's also important to me if we're within a field, right? So we've done all these things to try and manage the nutrients, put them where the soils test says we need them. You do all of these things. Well, if you let it run off the hill and collect in the low ground, that kind of thing, you know, you're kind of defeating your purpose of what you tried to do. So even within the field, without even thinking about erosion where the nutrients leave the field, there's a lot of value to holding those nutrients in place. Cover crops on our farm, choices that we use. Soy rye and annual ryegrass certainly are big players for us after corn. Oats, radish, clover, rape, and vetch would be generally after soybeans ahead of corn, some sort of mix with those, as well as if timing allows, we'll use some peas and some other things in the mix. I think the Sarebook was mentioned earlier as a great source. These are kind of our two situations that we see a lot of right now. So this was spring of 2016. And looking, we'll start on the left with the soybeans planted into cereal rye. That's about the height that I like to plant into it. That may have been sprayed or may not have. So we're kind of, we spray around the time of planting, depending on the weather and how things are going. So, but we don't want to spray too far ahead and have it lay down on us and get wet and things like that. You get a lot of water comes back out of these nice cover crops like that after you spray. That was probably 12, 14, something like that. And it's going to be a function of timing on this year, the way things are growing. I imagine we're going to plant into stuff a little bit taller than that. But the real key is, the worst thing I can do is get excited and spray it and then have to plant into it a week after I spray it. That's the very worst thing, because I'm laying there in a very wet, nasty situation. So I like to keep those two things as close together as possible, whether or not I'm spraying before or after. But if I'm going to spray it before I plant it, I want to be sure and know that we're going to get it planted before it lays down and gets too wet on me. So you can see nice seed bed there, great soil tilth behind that cereal rye. Bean planter works great in that situation. Then to the right is that mix I was talking about the oats, radish, rape, and crimson clover. I actually backed that oats rate down just a little bit here this fall, trying to open things up even a little bit more. And just like we've heard mentioned several times, when you put these things together, they work well together. You often don't need quite as high a rate as you might think. I think in the previous talk they were talking about 10 pounds of radish, and that's a function of the fact that that's radish by itself, right? So that may be even a little bit more than what we would do, but for me, if I was doing maybe just radish and oats, I'd look at 4 or 5 pounds of radish and 20-some pounds of oats and get a nice cover out of that. Radish by itself, you're going to have to make up a little more of that, so maybe 7 pounds, something like that. But anyway, the key is you don't need to crowd these things in the row, especially, Dave's up here on the front row, and he taught me about 15-inch planting. We planted 15-inch covers for a long time until it just got to be to the point where we're putting too many acres on the planter. But the important thing to look at there is in-row spacing, right? You don't need to crowd all these things up and have them go all vegetative. You need to give them some room to grow and let the predators see the ground and get the voles and those kind of things too. So certainly want to consider that on your rates. But anyway, we really like this mix. When we come up to spring on that mix with no-till corn, the oats and the radish both will have died out. But at that point, the rape and the clover have been well established, and they'll overwinter better than if you just plant them by themselves. And in the spring, so what you're looking at in the spring on this one that's just rape, and which is canola, and crimson clover. So fairly easy to get through, but does a great job of holding on to the nutrients. This would be an example, after that was sprayed out, corn coming up through it. That was probably about as big as we would normally ever let the rape get, but again, it's easy to take out with some 2,4-D. So a little bit about planting dates for us, where we're at, because I always get that question. It's going to be probably fairly similar for you guys here. We look at, in the summertime, if you've got wheat, you got lots of choices. The only thing I caution guys around us about it is if you get too early with your more cool season covers, if you get too early, they're going to see that heat and they're going to try and bolt and go to bloom and go reproductive on you. So we usually try and stay after the 10th of August with our normal fall cover crops. So something to consider there. Once we start harvesting beans, I really like Austrian peas. They're great after wheat and they're great after early soybeans, but they've got to be early for us where we're at to get them to establish and survive through the winter and get enough nitrogen out of them. We need to get those prior to the middle of September. Then we come into that mix. We plant a lot of Group 2 up to early Group 3 soybeans. So we have generally from the 10th of September up through the first week of October would be our normal expected bean harvest. Doesn't always work that way, but that's our normal expected bean harvest. So that's where the oats, the radish, the clover, grapeseed I don't have on that list, but that would fall into that category. Those all come up really well and do well planted in that time frame. Then we go into annual ryegrass up through late October if you can get it established so it doesn't freeze out. Certainly will work great in that situation. And then our cereal rye is generally our go-to, especially after corn, because with the early season beans, our corn's going to end up staying out there later, letting it dry down in the field. So pretty much we can come in with cereal rye anytime after we get done with corn harvest. I put November 10th on there. It's kind of that's really the goal for us to be done with harvest, not so much when we need to stop planting cereal rye. But you know, if you're a guy that wants to get out of the house on Christmas or whatever and go do something, you know, put some cereal rye in the drill, and I'm pretty sure you can go out Christmas Day and plant that and it'll be just fine, because cereal rye seems to establish and survive just about any time. Planting methods, there's already been some talk about interseeding and different planting methods. We won't spend a lot of time on that. Just know that there's a lot of different ways you can get this stuff planted. I consider seeded soil to be, you know, the key, especially when you're trying to plant after the corn or soybean crop, because you've got your day limited. If you're going to surface apply it with interseeding or aerial seeding, just know that you need to be 2 or 3 weeks ahead of when you can do it into the soil. You can get the same results. You just need to be sure you've got that 2 or 3 week lead. If I'm going to be harvesting corn today, or if I'm going to be harvesting corn tomorrow, I'm not going to fly on something into it today, because I've got the opportunity to get out there with the drill and pick up that 2 weeks. If I've got an opportunity to fly stuff on, and I'm not going to be harvesting for 3 weeks or a month, perfect opportunity. So you just need to think about that timing, think about the different things that you plant, what's in your mixes. Some things do better aerial applied than others, or surface applied. So you need to consider whether it's a hard seed that needs a lot of seed to soil contact to get enough moisture or not, those kind of things. So just again, lots of different results you can get with different ways to plant. Won't talk too much about mixes. Again, it's important to think about having different root types in your mixes. Think about the growth rates. You don't want one thing in there that's just going to overpower everything else and knock your other stuff out of the mix. What dates you're going to be planting and terminating. How you want to, if you want to build organic matter, break up compaction, those kind of things. And termination is important on mixes. A lot of guys run into trouble there. They'll put, say, a vetch in with an annual ryegrass. So the middle of April comes and they're worried about killing their annual ryegrass. They really need to let their vetch go for another 4 or 6 weeks to get the most benefit and the money that they've invested there. You need to be aware of how you're going to terminate these things and what you're going to do there. So certainly I recommend, I keep hearing stories, continue to hear stories of weed seed, poor germination, all these things in your poor quality seed sources, and even you just need to be aware of where your seed comes from. I encourage everybody to, when we were getting started in this, we used a lot of feed oats and a lot of feed grade products, and kind of learned the hard way. We had reintroduced bull thistle and some other things across the farm that we wish we hadn't done. We got them taken care of at this point, but certainly encourage you to know where your seed comes from. If it hasn't been tested, get it tested. Make sure you're not putting something out there you don't want. Most of these other things are pretty self-evident. Next couple of things I just want to talk real briefly. They've already been hit on today, so we won't have to talk very long, but the tile lines and voles start to play into the economics, which is what we're going to get into here real quick. Just an example here, the question came up earlier today in this room about the roots getting into the tile lines and whether that's a problem. Well, you can see the top left corner there. You can see the green streak there. We just finished installing tile in that field here a couple weeks ago when we got this nice warm spell. Did 120 acres there that was really cool because we had gone out there last year, had rye growing. We were able to identify all the tile lines in that field where they had scavenged the nitrogen out of that tile water. There were green streaks on top of every existing tile line. So, this is stuff that was put in 40 years ago. Really cool as far as, being able to identify that. That one happened to be particularly green. Seems like it ends up somewhere around the house up there or something. So those tend to be some of our bigger sources of nitrogen, I think. So that's cool. You see the clay tile there? That's actually one in that field. That Thanksgiving time frame picture that I showed earlier where we were putting in tile. That's a clay tile in that field. It's about 30 inches deep. What you're seeing there is the roots growing down, growing around, basically creating pores for the water to get to the tile. Tremendous. We love to see that. We see improved drainage, improved efficiency of the tiles with the cover crops. Of course, then you see the one, bottom left there that I would call not good, which is a situation in all of the maybe 20,000 acres of cover crops we've done, and most of that being well-tiled or pattern-tiled ground. We've had 2 instances that we're aware of where roots got into the tile and created this kind of problem. We've seen the same thing with corn roots over the years. It's generally where there's a problem with the tile or something going on where we're not getting the flow that we need. Maybe even just an outlet problem that we're just not getting enough flow to clean out the tile. If you have those issues, it was said earlier, there's certain cover crops that tend to get into that water and into those tiles more than others. So you may want to look at your cover crop selection if you think you have some of those issues or you're concerned about those. We had to talk about the voles earlier, so I don't have to educate anybody that hasn't seen a vole on what they are. But this is our plot that we're going to talk about where we're doing a lot of our cover crop research. And what you can see there is we have kind of the oats and radish in red, the no cover is not painted, and then in green and yellow we have the annual rye and cereal rye. And those white areas are vole colonies, and that's where they actually kill the soybeans, right? So we've got areas out there with no soybeans, and but what you can see that's interesting is that those are significantly different between the different cover crop treatments. Voles have always been a problem for us in no-till, even without cover crops, and that's evidence there. You can actually see the vole pressure is worse in the no cover crop strips than it is in the radish and oat cover crops. And I have heard this rumored, and I think this has kind of validated it for us that for some reason voles don't like radishes. And so that oat radish cover actually has lower vole pressure than the no cover. So, just my logic there is probably a good thing to have some radishes in the mix. So, but then you'll see the cereal rye and the annual rye both have pressure. In that case, it appears that the annual rye is a little heavier, but I think overall we see cereal rye tending to be a little bit heavier. But anyway, this will be important also as we go to the yield data for this plot later on to see what the effect was. But yeah, they are a problem and we have to deal with them, but not so much. I think that they're going to make us do a lot different. So all of that, long way around. So we're up to kind of what does this stuff cost? And I apologize, wasn't sure how big the screen would be in here. I apologize if it's a little bit hard to see. But really the orange boxes are the bottom line of what's important there. So in this case, I just took in the top section our seed costs. And so I looked at all the different mixes that we planted across all of our acreages and kind of figured out what the cost for each of those was, and then averaged. Okay, so our average seed cost for cover crops across the whole farm was $14.27. That's straight seed cost, and that's an average. Some of the mixes were higher, some lower. We're just looking overall, that's our average seed cost. Then we also took and we have aerial seeding there for the portion that we're aerial seeded. That's real easy to figure out what that costs per acre. And then we had, for the part that we planted, in this case we were using our 1990 air seeder, and we looked at labor, we kept track of hours, we kept track of fuel use on the tractor, which is real easy to do on these new tractors now. And we kept track of repairs on that drill, and tractor hours. And we tried to figure out what the cost was for each of those. And so we averaged that out, and our total average cost per acre to plant was $11.73. One thing to point out there, if you're worried about the cost of aerial seeding, or you're worried about the cost of paying the guy with the high boy to come in, it's not a lot different when you figure the cost of your time, your fuel, your hours on the tractor, and things like that. So if you're not doing cover crops because you don't want to spend the money on an applicator and you don't have the time to do it yourself, I would encourage you, you know what, it's worth the money to pay somebody to get the cover crop planted one way or another, or work with a neighbor and pay them a fair price or whatever, but it's going to cost you about the same no matter how you plant the cover crop. So our total cost per acre to carry forward into this next spreadsheet is about $26 an acre. That's average planting cost plus seed cost. So this is going to be a little bit harder to see. The numbers are a little bit smaller. But this is where the farmer math comes in. So I try to work with economists and things like that. And bottom line is, this is our farm, the things that we've seen, the things that we think are going on. So you can discount this, and we'll talk about that. But you need to verify it on your own farm. That's really what it comes down to. But as we go through here, there's several things that we just started to try and look at our costs and how those correlated to soil health and cover crops and improvements that we're making on the farm, trying to get some sort of a value assigned to these things. So we know that we're saving P&K, and that's based on the 1 acre grid data that we've been doing 1 acre grid since '93 and looking at the fertilizer that we're using now versus what we used to use, looking at tile discharge data that comes from several different places. We know we're keeping nutrients on the farm. We know we're keeping them in play. So there's a value to be given to those nutrients for the P&K. Nitrogen, we estimate that we get about 40 pounds per acre average with these different cover crop blends, and some of that's scavenged, some of it's produced, but we get about 40 pounds per acre. Now you'll see there I have a 0 value for the nitrogen. That's because as we move down through the sheet, there's a lot of things we're doing. We're crediting for building organic matter and things like that. We don't cut our nitrogen rates based on the scavenging of nitrogen that goes on with the cover crop. We are scavenging that nitrogen to build organic matter with. So in the long term, that will be coming back to us. There's a benefit to the organic matter, but we're not cutting rates. We don't want to starve the system. We want to build organic matter, and it takes nitrogen to build organic matter. So I'm not giving $1 credit to that nitrogen savings, but I think it's worth noting that there's 40 pounds there that we're putting back into the soil that's not going out the tile into the river, into the Lake Erie Basin or whatever. So the next one is the corn yield increase. I've got there 3 years, 9 tests. Cover crop plots are averaging 7.1 bushel. As we get to the plot data later on, I think that's a conservative number based on what we've seen on our farm, but we're seeing at least 7 bushel. We're getting from the benefit from cover crops in the corn yields. Soybean yields, we're seeing 2 bushel is what we credited there. I think you'll see in the multi-year data we have that that's also a very conservative number. But again, I'm trying to be conservative here just to look at if we can afford to do this or not. Drought and stress tolerance. You know, some years, 2012, big benefit for cover crops, 100 bushel the acre in a lot of cases, where we were able to keep the soil cooler, you know, keep the moisture there and have deeper rooting depths in the crop. But most years we get some benefits, and you're going to see in the soil moisture and temperature graphs in those July time frames when you get a couple dry weeks, there's a lot of benefit to the cover crops and having improved moisture and reduced crop stress. So there's some value there for that. And we tried to average that out magically over a few years. There's biologic improvement, which is really hard to put a number on, but we know that cycling and resilience in the soil has some value. So we just said, you know, a couple dollars an acre. Maybe it's more, maybe it's less. Our soil quality, the organic matter has a lot of value, and we're increasing the rate a lot faster with cover crops. At least twice as fast with cover crops as no-till with no cover crops. Arguably even more than that. Erosion reduction, we just took the 2 tons per acre that's acceptable, and I think in a no-till system with cover crops, you reduce that to almost 0. Right? So didn't try and say that that very valuable fraction that you would actually be using is worth $30,000 an acre or anything like that. We just said, you know what, ground selling for $10,000 an acre, so that's a couple dollars a ton, so it's $4 an acre. Not trying to overstate the value there, just trying to put some value. We've been talking, you know, other programs, the CSP programs on there. We've been doing these things. We get a CSP payment based on doing these. I'd encourage anybody that you know, is doing conservation practices to look into these programs. You know, we're getting paid to do the right thing instead of getting paid to do the wrong thing in some cases. So I would certainly encourage you to take advantage of those programs. When you put that all together, in this case, this was 2 years ago, so we were only looking at about 3,600 acres, 3,700 acres of cover crop total. But we're looking at $37,000 or $376,000 worth of benefit. Now that's not benefit that I'm going to put in the bank today, right? Some of that's long-term benefit, some of that stuff that I'm doing probably with the hopes that my kids are going to get, you know, continued benefit from improving soil quality. But a lot of it is, there's a significant portion of it that is short-term return. We had a total investment of $91,000 in cover crop seed. That comes forward from the previous sheet we were looking at on seed costs, giving us a total net economic benefit of $285,000 for growing cover crops in that year. Now, you say, that's pretty crazy, right? There's no way that it's worth that much. I don't see that much showing up on my bottom line. So I've had that argument, and as I said, these are on my farm, my numbers, and so what you have to do is think about on your farm. If you think I'm full of it, that's a 311% return on investment. Let's take it in half, okay? Say I over-exaggerated everything. So take the value in half. We're still at 150% return on investment. It's still a good investment. You still think I'm crazy? Take that in half again. If you can make an investment that's a 75% return on investment, chances are you're going to do it. So for us, every time we do this, every time we update it, we look at it again, it just gets to the point where, you know what, cover crops is one of the best investments we can make with our money.
What was the bottom line number there?
So our net, $81 an acre. Yep, that's about a 300% return on the $26 that we had in seed cost. So now, just to back up some of those numbers that we were looking at, quickly going forward here. Organic matter. This is just one of the fields that I grabbed from 2002 to 2012. We took the average organic matter in this field from 2.5 basically up to 3.6%, so 1.1% gain in organic matter. Huge benefit in production, you know, in yield potential and things when you do that. You can also notice there the range was from 1.4 to 4.0. The lighter soils are a little harder, a little slower to respond. We took that 1.4 to a 1.8. That's still on the tops of those hills. That's a big deal. And we took those good dark soils from 4 to 6. So we're actually getting back up close to what that native soil would have been. And this is after it had already been no-tilled for probably 10 to 15 years prior to this 10-year period. So this is some of our data. This is our plot that we have where we're testing all these things, looking at nitrogen rates and different covers and things. It's on a corn-soybean rotation, so 2015 was the last year it was corn. It'll be corn again this year in 2017. You can see here, it's really hard to pick out, but the important thing in the data to look at there, there's 41 strips out. This is a 100-acre field, 41 field length strips. And we have 2 reps of our different cover crop plots. So we have 2 reps of annual rye, 2 reps of cereal rye, 2 reps of oats and radish, and 2 reps of no cover. Within each of those, we have 5 different nitrogen rates. So we're looking at the responses to nitrogen with the cover crops. So that's what's represented to the left here. And the ranking in each of those cases of which one yielded the most. The important thing to note is no matter what the nitrogen rate, no matter what the cover crop, it is always better than the no cover crop. That's the thing that we see time and time again. This is the 3rd time through on this test. Anytime you use a cover crop, it yields more than no cover crop, basically across the board. So certain cover crops respond better when you have higher nitrogen rates. Certain do a better job of scavenging nitrogen and helping the yield at lower rates. But regardless, it's always better to have a cover crop than no cover crop. In this case, in 2015, 12.8 bushel of corn would be the advantage to having a cover crop overall averaged across all those nitrogen rates. This would be the 2013 data. In this case, you're looking at 7.1 bushel, which is the number I used because I thought the 12 was a little high. So I went and dropped back to the 7 bushel number to use in the economic analysis. Obviously, I think that's conservative at this point because we continue to see improvements where we have the cover crops. So soybean data, same thing. You can see here, this is the 3 years because we don't do the nitrogen test, so it's a little easier to condense. So we've got 3 years of soybean tests here on the different cover crops. And again, the important thing to notice is in every case, no cover is at the bottom of the list, 4th place. So it's always better to have a cover. Some years one cover will win versus another, but it's always better. So you can see up to 8 bushel advantage there for the cover crops versus the no cover in those strips. Looking at soil moisture, we were talking about where some of these benefits come from and where we see some of these yield benefits. Soil moisture is key. So in that plot, there are soil moisture probes out there throughout the summer. And this is just an example. You can see the gray line and the yellow line are 2 different depths, 10 centimeter and 20 centimeter for the no cover strips. And then the kind of orangish red and the blue lines are the cereal rye strips. And what you can see there is every time we have a rainfall event, we get recharge. So we're coming along, the no cover is drying out faster. We get a rainfall event, and the area where the cover crop was actually recharges to a higher level. And then we start back down, drying out. No cover dries out the fastest. And you just see this cycle repeat. And so what you're seeing is that we've got much less water stress going to happen, much better utilization of the water in these areas where we have cover crops. And this is July following a cereal rye cover that actually was terminated when it was about 10 inches tall. There's not really much cover left out there. This is the benefit of the water infiltration. This is the benefit of the soil structure and air exchange. We didn't have a 6-foot tall cover crop that we rolled down and made a mat. This is just a structural benefit to having the cover crops. See the same thing here going on with temperature. And to me, temperature is a big deal as far as what the plant sees and why we get the yield responses. So when you're looking at temperature here, you'll see daily basis the temperature where there's no cover, which now, so the gray line is at the top and at the bottom. So we have much more temperature variability from night to day where there was no cover, and much more consistent temperatures where we had covers. This is a little easier to see that. This is the full month of July. So we're hitting higher highs and lower lows where there was no cover. So that plant is much happier in these areas where we had cover. This is aggregate stability. When I talked about trafficability, when you talk about how the soil structure is holding together, this is all no-till. These are just advantages to the cover crops. So you'll see the orange bar there, which is the no cover crop area, and all of the cover crop treatments having a greater aggregate stability, which would be a soil quality indicator for us there. Just an example, there's a lot of places at this point doing research, and they're all kind of seeing the same thing. Everybody's seeing some of these yield benefits to cover crops. So I'll just say in conclusion, I think there's a lot of benefits, and you got to match them to your goals. So you got to really think through what your goal is, whether it's purely economics, building organic matter, those kind of things. But you need to test on your farm, see what works, and I think soil quality is really the end goal that we're all shooting for. Not a good stand of cover crops, not a no-till system. We need to come up with systems that build that soil quality. So. We got a few minutes left for questions.
Yeah, I think we got plenty of questions. So, who wants to be the first guinea pig? Questions? Come on, here's questions. I should grab before that.
On your soil testing, you're doing 1 acre grids at what depth?
I'm running 6 3/4 inches deep, 6 cores at the kind of in an area in the center of that 1 acre grid.
You're not having any stratification with no-till?
Yes, I do. The question is whether it matters. So yes, I have stratification. I do believe that now that we're using the cover crops and doing some of the things we're doing, we've got so much residue moving down with the worms and so much stuff getting cycled through that root mass. We see less stratification issues now, and with keeping more moisture in the top, I've just gotten to the point where any kind of mixing that we've tried to do or any kind of banding that we've tried to do, I can't get a yield benefit, so I just decided I don't care anymore.